Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Michaela Baum, and I'm so excited to dive in. Hello, magical ones, and welcome. This is the show where we speak directly to the hearts and souls of those magical women who don't yet know their full magic and power. Women who have been feeling disconnected from their true creative power and selling their souls to secure the love, approval, and security of a spiritless society instead of manifesting all the magic that they are capable and worthy of. So I've birthed a free live new moon ritual experience to help you take the tender first steps into the Live Your Wild Alchemy path. Manifesting with the Moon is our monthly gathering of witch sisters meeting for a live new moon ritual celebration to help you begin to vision and manifest the life of your dreams. Get up close and intimate with me, book your free ticket, join us at nicolebarton.co.uk/moon-circle. My guest today is Michaela Baum. Michaela travels and teaches internationally as an expert in intimacy, relationships and sexuality. A gifted speaker and counsellor, her unique body of work centres around the intersection of intimacy and embodiment. With an extensive 30,000 plus hours in-person counselling background, clinical experience in trauma and addiction, and innovative somatic approach, her work with celebrity couples has been featured in international print publications, TV programmes and online talk shows. Most recently, her approach has been featured on the Netflix series Unwell and Love, Sex and Goop. Michaela is the creator of the non-linear movement method, a somatic release modality which utilises principles of trauma therapy, polyvagal theory and movement for nervous system regulation. Her book, The Wild Woman's Way, was published in 2018. This is a juicy and intimate one, so let's dive in. Michaela, I'm so delighted to have you with us on The Secret Witch Show. We've had this booked in for a while now, because I'm a big fan of your work in The Wild Woman's Way. And then, funnily enough, when I'd booked this in with you, someone in a woman's circle mentioned your recent show on Netflix, Sex, Love and Goop. And I was like, well, there's magical timing if ever there was some. So yeah, really excited to dive into this and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, which is very appropriate given the topic that we're here to talk about, which is all about how wild woman intimacy and pleasure can unlock your life. So yeah, I think where I always like to start is if you could share a little bit about your own journey. And I think it was in your book actually. I remember you saying when you were 12 you decided to become a witch. So yeah, I thought this will make an interesting story for our secret witches at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I definitely had great aspirations to become a witch, and I think I have succeeded by now. So in the sense that I wanted, even with 12, I didn't know what that really meant, but I wanted a life in which my gifts and my talents could be used appropriately. And I knew back then I wasn't as conventional as, the people around me. And I knew back then that I wanted to really learn some skills to support other people and, essentially move the realms of the earthly realms as well as the heavenly realms, so to speak, because I had even back then a very strong interest in spirituality and myth and folklore and things like that. So that was my career aspiration. And I have to say that I think when I look back over the years, wasn't always easy, but I think I have somewhat succeeded.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way to me as well. It's really interesting. So you really kind of knew this very early on by the sounds of it. Like you had this deep wisdom, that you had this deep kind of knowing of who you were.
I would definitely say knowing or inkling more than wisdom, because no 12-year-old is wise.
Yeah,
And I was definitely a little punk, and and all of that. But I think I had a very strong sense of connection with nature, and out of that strong connection with nature, and having grown up in the natural world, and out in the country, and with parents who were very good at making sure that I was outside. And of course times were different as well. You could be outside. There were no computers or phones or things that would distract you out there in nature. So because of that strong connection with nature and the elements, I've always had both a very mythical orientation, and as well a very strongly embodied kind of orientation.
Two of my favorite things. So I'm wondering now which one to dive into first. Yeah, gorgeous. Because obviously, the wild woman archetype is a big part of your work. There's that to dive into, and I suppose it ties into this kind of body connection as well, really. So, yeah, I want to ask on both of those. So it's up to you where we begin. Um,
Well, the wild woman is an archetype, right? And this is always something that's quite interesting, because there is some people even who teach workshops and things like that, who somehow think that the wild woman is somebody who is claws and fangs and screaming and shouting and being unhinged. But of course, the wildness is a connection to nature, not so it's really wild, meaning natural, and not wild as in out of control. And that aspect, that particular archetype, the wild woman, as in a woman connected to her nature and to nature in general, just means someone who's aware of their internal and the external cycles, that's connected to the natural world, and with that, of course, connected to our own body. And that's a very important part when we talk about the wild woman. What we're talking about, well, all female archetypes in one way or another, we're talking about the connection to internal cycles as well as external cycles, and the rising and the falling of the tides, the rising and the falling of our menstrual cycle, the rising and falling within periods of life, the moon, the sun. There's so much there that has directly to do with our body, and not even in a very esoteric way. Simply things like circadian rhythms or menstrual rhythms and things like that. Our body is so tied to the natural world, and when we go out of whack with that, for instance with bright lights, and not resetting our circadian rhythms according to where we are in the world and the time zones and stuff, it has a huge negative effect, not only on the physical body, but also on our mood and on our ability to be in the world and connect with others. So to me, the wild woman archetype and embodiment are one, essentially. It's the same exploration.
Yeah, I love that. That makes perfect sense, actually. And of course, for me, I suppose talking about the witch is really just that as well. It's just another powerful archetype that we're really in this path of like the secret witch is really that's the aim of like fully embodying. I used to call her the wild witch, which kind of encompasses the wild woman, but there's also kind of the witch queen. So there's like a bit of a crossover in lots of different ways that you can explore the witch, really. But yeah, so in relation to, I guess, the witch, how do you see that the wild woman, I suppose you talked about that a little bit with with the rhythms of nature. Yeah, I'm just wondering where to explore here. I think maybe something around the body, because I'm just thinking to kind of the wounds that the secret witch might feel. And I think one of the main ones is this kind of real disconnection from her body, because, you know, we're in a culture that perhaps doesn't necessarily see the importance of that. So I wonder if you can speak to that kind of disconnection that we often experience, and how secret witches can kind of learn to really reconnect into that, because that's been something that I recently ran a program, Invoke Your Wild Creatrix, which was a lot about that, because it feels to me to be one of the most important parts of reclaiming our witch, really, especially our wild witch.
Well, let's see how I can slice this, because there's a lot in there.
There is.
So I think one of the things that we have to say about the witchy aspect of all of us, right? You know, let's see how I can phrase this quickly, because this is a big topic. Our intuition and also our ability to make things happen in the world from a more holistic place reside in the body. So a lot of the attributes of a witch, so to speak, are really attributes of the natural genius of our body. And because when you look at how human beings were developed, so to speak, right, we have come up as bodies with brains, but our brains weren't that developed. But we came up with bodies that had to survive in very harsh conditions. And so long before we had, long before that big jump was where the human brain developed, into something really massive, there was already very strong body intelligence. And so when you look at, for instance, the first parts of the brain as we know them and all of that, they all have to do with surviving in the midst of adversity, and in the midst of adversity also procreating. And what that means very strongly is that in order to survive in the wild, you need to be incredibly clued in, right? Because if you're not, you get eaten, or you fall down something, or you don't know what to pick and eat. You cook the wrong stuff and you die, all of that. So very often people who had lesser faculties in being clued in and connected with nature died before they could procreate. So natural selection, so to speak, made it that we all come from people and all our ancestors managed to at least survive long enough to have the next round of offspring and so on. So there's a really, really strong programming in every cell of our body that says, be clued in and you live, right? And so when you go hunting, for instance, or fishing, when you look at people who do that well for survival, not just for sport with an AK-47, obviously, but they have to feel the deer in the forest. They have to feel the fish under the water. They have like almost extrasensory perception around knowing where animals are and tracking them and stuff like that. All of that is called intuition or premonition or power or whatever. But these are things every human being has. It's just that some people have practiced those skills, because these are skills. So all skills are learned through repetition. Some people are more gifted in those skills naturally, so they don't have to work so hard for them. But they are available to all of us. We all have intuition. Intuition is what makes you duck when a ball flies up to your head and you don't even see it because it comes from behind. And you'll feel it, right? If you're somewhat sensitive, you'll feel it. And this also, of course, is true for things like mate selection, birthing. All of that comes from a place in the body that's been programmed for many, many, many millions of years. And so when we talk about witchy traits in the body, all the witchy traits come out of the body, right? They come also, the power to and strengths, right? Because often what's associated with the archetype of the witch is power, right? Uncompromising power, not being afraid of what other people think, not being afraid to be on the outskirts of existence for the sake of living your truth. Those kind of things all have to do with being able to navigate in the world. And and often that also meant hiding in plain sight, because it was always a dangerous endeavor to not conform. So all of that that allow that that both moving things in the physical world, tracking things in the physical world, the intuition, the ability to connect with others, that all happens in the body. So that's it. When we look at embodiment, what we're looking at is essentially just sensitizing ourselves to what's already there, because it's been there longer than anything else. So now what you were saying earlier is we're not living in a world where that is valued. It's also not what makes us survive in the world right now.
I love that. That's such a, that's like a mind-blowing moment for me that you've just, the way that you've just explained it. It's like, it's just, it was our intuition was really our form of survival.
Yeah.
Wow. That is mind-blowing, really.
And by the way, to take it further, our sensual ability is a form of survival.
Ooh, say more on that.
Well, what is sensual perception? Well, sensual perception is nothing else but perceiving through all five senses. So when you engage all five senses in an activity, you are able to make sense of things. So for instance, right, you're out in the wild and you need to eat. Well, that will mean that all five senses have to be engaged for you to eat. You have to see things that you could go towards that might be edible, or hunting, right? Same day with hearing. You have to hear potential prey, but also you could hear things like certain birds in certain bushes, which point you towards certain berries and stuff like that. The sound of running water, that indicates that you get something to drink, and so on and so on. So there's a lot to hearing. So that's your second: sight, hearing. Then, of course, smell. You can't survive if you can't smell what's edible and what isn't. For instance, is this meat gone off so far that it will kill me, or is it gone off just enough that I can roast the hell out of it and still eat it, right? So that's your smell. Or also knowing what's sweet and what's pungent and what's potentially dangerous. Taste, of course, right? Big one. That is essentially incredibly necessary for survival when you need to figure out what can you eat, what can't you eat. And touch, which is the one thing that if you don't have, you can't actually live, right? They've done these horrible experiments with depriving babies in orphanages of touch. They fed them properly, they changed them properly, they gave them everything they needed, just weren't touched, and they died. Many of them died. I know, it's so fucked up to begin with, but there's that was all done because touch is so important. Touch between two people, making a child, touch between a mother and a child, touch for healing, touch for let's say practical purposes. There's all of that. So those are your five senses. So sensual aliveness, and with that sensual pleasure, is built in. It's a birthright. Now, of course, when we now look at why don't we all do that? Well, it's not necessary. We're barely ever in a real survival situation. Yes, we have to make a living. We have to get from A to B, those are our survival situations. They don't require that we are fully sensually alive. Right now, our bodies are parked in chairs. We're looking at a computer screen and we're thinking and talking. Our body doesn't need much, you know. And so when you put attention on your body right now, you have to probably work to feel all the parts of your body, because it's not necessary. There's nothing wrong with not feeling your body while you're doing something that doesn't require your body. Right? Your body runs itself. The problem is just that as a human being, whatever you do most is your predominant pattern. And that, of course, means that if you spend 10 hours a day driving, looking at computer screens and phones and so on, that's your predominant habit. Versus if you spend 10 hours a day foraging and being out in nature and building things and running and hunting and training your body, then that's your predominant habit. And it's that simple, and yet, of course, very complicated, but we don't need our body's faculties for the way we need to survive nowadays. So we just don't have it. But it's always there and always available, obviously. It's just not, you don't have a lot of muscle around it because you don't need a lot of muscle.
Yeah, I'm really curious. So, because obviously, you talk about the importance of pleasure. So there must be and for me, touch and the senses is a huge part of my work. So it feels like although we don't need it to survive, we kind of do need it in some way, if that makes sense. So I guess, can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, of course we need it. I'm talking about the actual survival, right? So barely ever do wild animals come for us, right, in our modern world. Barely ever is our actual life in danger. Our survival has to do with paying for things so that we can have a housing and food and whatever, right? So the skills that are needed for survival nowadays are not the skills that were needed for survival when we were built, right? But of course, the other aspect of survival is, sex and pleasure and all of those kind of things. But you can procreate without any of those, and a lot of people do, meaning a pleasure-filled, sensually alive, deeply connected life isn't necessary. Doesn't mean we don't want it, right?
Yeah, and I guess the witch is in the work of really creating a juicy, fulfilled,
that's right,
magical life. So I suspect, when we come to, there are huge costs to our soul, I guess, in not experiencing pleasure.
Yes.
But I guess what you're saying is that it's a choice. It's not necessary for survival, but it's something that we can choose into if we want to create a magical feeling, juicy, alive life.
Yes, but that's an important distinction, right? We have to choose it. There's many things we can choose, and it's a choice we can make. We're not deficient. This is very, very important. It's just a muscle we don't use much. Like there's many muscles we don't use much, right? I don't swim much. I live in the mountains. So if I would have to do a long ocean swim, I'd probably not do that well. Right? But that doesn't mean I couldn't train myself to have a really decent ocean swimming capacity. There's no reason not to. It's just I'm not doing it. I would have to drive down to the ocean every day and devote an hour or two a day to that skill set. And the same is true with the witchy skills, so to speak, right? You have to go, I want to do that. That is what's important to me. I'm going to spend time reconnecting to my body. I'm going to spend time reconnecting to my intuition. I'm going to spend time learning how to set proper boundaries so I don't only care for other people, but also for myself, and so on and so on and so on, right? So all of that's possible, but it's a choice and not a deficiency. And I think that's part of the the gifts of the witch is that you understand that you have it and that there's nothing wrong with you. It's just a matter of, essentially learning different, skills.
I so love that you've made that distinction there, because again, for me, like the path of soul, walking the path of soul really is about that devotion to what it is that you want to choose into, to what it is that you want to create. So yeah, that really makes a lot of sense, that it's a choice, it's a conscious choice that we can make in order to really feel that pleasure in life, I guess. And I know you talk a lot about pleasure and a lot about desire, so I wonder if you could just explore, for those people who may not experience desire and pleasure, how they can be in the work of reclaiming that, I guess, if that is something they want to choose.
Yeah, I would definitely say that the way to pleasure, the way to desire is via the five senses. That's the quickest and most elegant and least tedious way, so to speak, right? Is to start having sensory experiences, lots of them, so that your body becomes alive as a sensory being, right? And so that can be anything from, sitting and drinking a cup of tea and really tasting and really smelling and really touching the warm cup and really seeing a pleasing, tea set up and listening to some music or some chimes in the background or whatever, right? It could be something like that. It could be engaging with your own body by feeling touch, your own body, your own touch, all of those kind of things that you can do very, very easily that allow you to awaken all the senses. You can do one sense at a time, have some flowers on your desk at work, have one of the things that I always have is one of those little prickly balls that I keep under my desk so I can move my feet around on it when I'm working, so that my attention goes kind of into the body versus just up in the head and things like that. So there's many, many little things that you can do, scents, incense, candles, sprays, whatever, and then training yourself to be aware of what that does to the body. And then that all adds up to what I call background pleasure. And background pleasure is the pleasure that's always already in the body, so to speak. And that pleasure that's always already in the body, you don't have to get from outside, which of course makes it so much, you're already so much more, like you said, juicy and alive and aware, because it's there. It's always there. You just need to be able to find it.
I love that background pleasure. Is there another kind of pleasure that's not just background pleasure?
Well, background pleasure is essentially the pleasure we have always available to us, but we don't feel. And then there's, of course, external pleasure, the pleasure that we derive from things around us.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, there's that makes sense. Have you got examples of that, just to make that clear?
Well, I mean, everything from somebody touching us, somebody else touching us, to actual things like vibrators or whatever, or that's in the sexual domain. But in the sensual domain, having a piece of chocolate and taking that piece of chocolate and allowing that piece of chocolate to enliven your body, versus, let's say, running your tongue over the roof of the mouth and feeling the sensation of running your tongue over the roof of the mouth, which is incredibly pleasurable if you're relaxed, right? If you relax your jaw right now and then run your tongue over the roof of your mouth, it's really quite exquisite. And you can essentially create all kinds of internal sensations by moving your body and by feeling the sensations of your own body before you even take something from the outside. You can, have somebody tickle you with feathers or whatever there is but you could also just move your hair or swish it around on your neck and focus on how your hair rubs on your neck and what kind of sensations that are. So we have so much internal experience that we're not aware of because we're so heavily externally oriented.
Yeah, I love that. And what I'm wondering, I'm thinking that the secret is listening might be wondering, is like, well, why? Why do we do that? Why would we choose that?
Because that's what we're used to. Right? Whatever we are used to is what we choose. It's not that complicated. Human beings are built on repetition. And so whatever you're used to is what you do. Whatever you do the most, you become used to. Right? Yeah. So when you see it in those terms, it's not that easy to change. If every day for a month, you spend 5 minutes on your sensual awareness, that will become a much bigger habit than when you never do it, other than when, now suddenly you feel like your partner should do that for you, but you don't really have even that much practice or perception. You can't even really get it fully unless they so overwhelm you that it fries your circuits, so to speak, right? So it's just a matter of choosing to do some things over others. So you have a choice between scrolling through Instagram, or you have the choice of touching an incredibly pleasing teacup that has a knobbly kind of texture with some really good tea in it, or hot cocoa or something in front of a fire that looks really beautiful, with some music playing in the background. Well, those are your two options. One will make you alive and make your body vibrate with pleasant sensation. One does very little other than make you feel less than other people on your Instagram feed.
Yeah. Well, when you put it like that, I mean, it sounds like, yeah.
That's not to say that ever so often, the Instagram feed isn't the thing to do, but you need to know when you want to do what. That's really, really important.
Comes back to that choice, doesn't it? Really, it's it really is a choice, all of it, really. There's a lot of women that I know who I work with, or maybe have been in my programs, can often feel some resistance to going into their bodies, and I think there's this level of like, when we're not used to being in our bodies, it can bring up quite a lot of stuff, particularly trauma, or shame or fear, or all sorts of things. So I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that, because I know that comes up quite often for some of my own clients.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you start sensitizing to what's happening inside, you're sensitizing to everything, not just to the pleasant stuff. And what that means is that you will feel more pleasure, but you also will feel whatever else there's to be felt, right? So my teaching partner, Steve, always says intimacy doesn't have informed consent. And what he means by that, of course, is if you become intimate with the sensations of your body, you become intimate with the sensations of your body, whatever they may be. And so, there is a reason not to want to be with that, because it can be very unpleasant. And there's also, if you have some trauma there, or some, stuff that you haven't dealt with, that getting into your body feels like opening Pandora's box. The good news, though, is that the body has an entire mechanism that cleans itself out if you just get started. So it's not one of those things where you open Pandora's box and now you're crying for 3 weeks straight. It's pretty much just, you just have to allow yourself to go there. And once you go there, the kind of self-regulating mechanisms of your body can kick in, unless you shut it back down by numbing again.
I love that. Yeah, it's feels so important. It's like we really have to go there to unlock everything that's happening in the body.
Yes. And so embodiment practices, and that's why I'm so big on embodiment practices, and that's why I created the nonlinear movement method, which is specifically a modality that unlocks stuff from the body and washes it out. And so that's really an important thing to consider, is that you can, through the body, do things that you don't even need to know about, right? You don't need to actually excavate it all. You can just trust your body to let go of it.
Gorgeous. It comes back to that kind of intuition again. Which is, that's really beautiful. And so just to be clear, by embodiment practices, can you just explain that a little bit, just to bring some clarity around what an embodiment practice might be? And I know you've already talked about some ways of kind of sensitizing the body. So is it that? Is there more that you would say to that, or?
Well, I would say that an embodiment practice is any practice that gets you more in touch with your body. There are some general guidelines of what works better than other things. So non-linear motion is better than linear motion, which is why the method is called non-linear movement method. So meaning unorganized movement better than organized movement. So for the cleansing and reconnecting, not in general. I want to make that very clear. I'm a big fan of weightlifting and yoga and things like that as well. But they're linear motions, and you use them to organize yourself in a certain way. When you want to give the body the permission to let go, you want to do things that are not entirely linear. So things like just spazzing out to a song, right? Not even choreographed dancing, not looking cool or looking hip, but just like allowing your entire body to do what it needs to do, like that kind of stuff. Going for walks in nature, ideally on uneven terrain, splashing about in a lake or an ocean, or having a cold dip, or having a bath, doing things where you touch your body, like massage, your self-massage, self-pleasure, like I said, dancing. You could be doing things like cooking a meal with the music on, or, pretty much anything that doesn't follow clear structure will do. And you just can't combine it with things that get you back into your head. So for instance, I love certain podcasts, and some of these podcasts are very technical and very heady. And I used to go into the sauna, which was a place where I would have to spend some time to get the benefits, and listen to one of those heady podcasts. And then I noticed that I couldn't really feel when I was overheating or so, because it was very technical. It's like science podcasts. And so then I stopped and just listened to music. And then I could be much more appropriately dealing with my body and get the benefits that come from the sauna. So you have to, but that might not be true for everybody, right? So you have to experiment. When do you pull out of sensitization and perception? When do you land in sensitization and perception? Those are your two guidelines, essentially.
I love that. I love that it's like, that point about it being really unique for everyone. But also the way that you just described that really kind of brings it back to the wild woman for me, because it feels like the non-linear movement is that kind of wilder, more intuitive, kind of movement. So that makes perfect sense as well. There's a question I had, which I feel may be relevant here, from one of the members in my group. And she said, I'd love to hear more on accessing women's pleasure or coming back to her body when we work in a corporate linear environment. Sometimes movement alone doesn't feel enough. It could take movement, a bath, breathing, and I have things to do in the evening. Are there ways to incorporate coming back into the body during the day when in the office, so there's not an enormous job to do at the end of the day?
Yes, good question. And yes, by the way, the entire the last bit of the last chapter of my book are those little hacks. So there are all these little hacks that you can do. And so once again, those little hacks are things that have to do with doing short bursts of activity that brings you into the body. So this could be anything from, like I said, I love those little prickly balls for my feet, because I can do that while I'm working. And that reminds me that I have a body and it keeps me in my body. To setting your alarm. I have now one of those new Fitbits. I've always very much kind of resisted wearing something, but that thing has little buzzing function when I sit still for too long. So when I feel that buzz, I get up and I do hip circles. And that's something that you can easily do even in a corporate environment. You go to the bathroom, you lock yourself into the biggest stall, you do, 2 minutes of vigorous hip circles of all kinds, just circling the hips, and that makes a huge difference. Squatting makes a huge difference, just going into a squat, shaking the body out, drinking something delicious and focusing on just that, right? Like smelling it, tasting it, swallowing it, touching, so you can take a 5-minute tea break. You can even pretend to look at your computer while you're doing that. Listening to things that are pleasing, right? So there's all kinds of ways where throughout the day you can always go back, feeling your clothing on your skin and how good that feels. All those kind of things can be done all day. So you can have little sensual snacks, so to speak, throughout the day. And then that allows you to not have so far to go in the evening. Because it is far to go sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really glad she asked that question. She also asked another question. She said, when I come back from that environment, I find it harder to connect with my partner because we're both in a masculine energy. Are there quicker ways to create polarity more instantly?
Yes, well, go away from your partner and do the things that bring you into the body. Right, so that's number one. Do not expect your partner to do the work for you. And do not expect yourself to do the work for your partner. That's very, very important. You have to have a moment to step away, and the partner needs a moment to step away. It doesn't work. So of course, if you have children, that's very difficult because you have to put the children first and put maybe the children to bed and things like that. So then it would be coming home, taking care of business, and then when the kids are in bed, one partner has goes and hangs out and reads, the other one goes and has a bath or whatever. You could also take a walk together. That's fine. And move your body together. But then there's a golden rule, and that's an absolute it's absolute no to talk about your day in that sense.
Oh, okay.
You can talk about your day before you want to have that intimate connection. But if you think that your intimate connection will come from mutual complaint, it's going to not happen, right? And people don't understand that. They think that offloading on their partner somehow makes you feel closer, but it doesn't. It just stresses your partner because on top of their own stuff, now they have your stuff to deal with. So the key is to connect on topics that have nothing to do with your daily existence. And that in itself will create good polarity.
And just because we've kind of dived into the masculine and feminine polarity there without really, I suppose, exploring it, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit to that.
Well, I don't believe in masculine and feminine at all, right? I think it's a huge disservice to humans to slice through a lens that's so reductive, and that's essentially a straitjacket from the 50s with a bit of a new age tantric gloss, where people have these, and the masculine. Well, yes, I have a masculine too. So do you. The part of me that shows up on time, the part of me that can make coherent sense, the part of me that pays the bills is the masculine, right? But the masculine has a connotation as if that's the manly part of me. It's not the manly part of me, it's the part of me that gets stuff done. the part of me that's capable of keeping my shit together when stuff gets hard, the part of me that is able to organize my thoughts. That's not inherently masculine. It's just an organizing principle within my being. The feminine, on the other hand, is not nearly as chaotic as people always describe it, right? It's just our ability to be in the flow of things. That's why I call it go and flow, because go and flow has no connotation of men and women connected to it. And when you go with go and flow, go being the part of all of us that goes and does stuff, and flow, the part of all of us that enjoys the play and the drifting from one thing to the other, and sometimes the chaos and sometimes the surrender, then we can understand that in each human both exist equally. But what we have, and that's an important distinction, is we usually have a sexual preference. So sexually speaking, we tend to like being the goer or the flower. Right. Yeah. And so the important piece is that somebody with a goer preference has sex with a flower, and that somebody who likes to flow has sex with somebody who likes to go, and then within that you can switch it up, but there's a preference, what you like most of the time. And so where people have problems, and as the woman was asking the question was saying, is I'm in go, he's in go. Well, two people in go get shit done, but it's very combative. It's not very sexy, and somebody's got to go into flow. But the problem, of course, is when both people have gone into go all day, then what they want both is to go into flow for a moment to reset. And that's really important. And that the reason I don't like masculine and feminine is that there's this whole bizarre situation that's typically flogged by people who don't have actual functional relationships, that the man is always in his masculine and the woman goes into her feminine. And the thing is, well, if you spend all day kicking ass and taking names later, you can't continue doing that without resentment or fatigue. It's inhumane. So to somehow ask that the masculine partner, which is typically the man, kind of upholds that rigidity so that the other partner can flow, it doesn't work like that. What has to happen is both people need to go all day. Both people want to flow afterwards. And you have to allow for that. And then you go, when both people have had the chance to flow, then you go, well, how do we like it sexually? Oh, today I'll be the goer, you'll be the flower, because that's what we like, right? And then after that recalibration, you can go back to leading and following, which one is a one way to say that, right? So when people say polarizing, they don't even know what that means. What it means is one of each and the play of that. It doesn't mean the guy is the rigid taker of things and the woman is, it's not like that. It could be that on that evening, your partner is so tired that even though you prefer flow, you're going to offer the gift of go. And you take over and you make the moves and you guide the experience. And then the next time when you had a particularly rough day at work, your partner takes over and provides a flawless go to your, somewhat, needed flow. So it's just important to know that what it really looks like and what creates polarity is just opposites.
Yeah, that's what was just coming to mind as you said that. So it's almost like there's just something around needing an opposite.
Yeah. So it's movement and stillness. It's the observer and the one who gets observed. It's following and leading. It's active and passive. So it's, you can cut out all that neo-tantric rhetoric and just go down to the heart of the matter, which is there has to be one of each. That's what creates polarity. Everything else is dogma. And in dogma, often what gets lost is our willingness to be a gift, our willingness to be generous, our willingness to extend ourselves for the sake of your partner and your relationship. And interestingly enough, the number one marker of a successful long-term relationship is generosity, not polarity.
Yeah, it almost brings us back round to that kind of choosing into what we want to create again.
Yeah.
Kind of consciously choosing to be the opposite, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's not always, on the path to creating a magical life or a juicy life or a life that feels alive. It isn't always an easy path. It isn't always an easy choice.
Correct.
So I kind of love what you've shared there. It kind of brings us back to that choosing in a way.
Yes, and it also brings us back to the which part, which is that we're not conforming to stereotypes, even if they're newer stereotypes, right? Where we just go, who are we and what works best for us? And we unapologetically pursue the expression of that, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of all the beings around us, and in fact, all beings, right? And so when you do that, then you're truly a witch in the sense, secret or out there, that you are considering the good of beings.
Yeah, it's almost like coming back to what's in alignment for us in that moment. It's like we talk about expression of soul as like expression of our uniqueness, and I talk about our soul will, which is us kind of having the capacity to choose, I guess, and to live in alignment with that truth. But it's like what you're speaking to there is really that we're all unique and we're all living life moment to moment. So it's almost like consciously tuning into what we want to choose in each moment.
Exactly. And that's then where we are in the territory of, full self-expression.
Yeah, I love that. Gorgeous. So I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that I want to ask you, because I think we're pretty much at the end, and I just trying to see if there's any last questions that I can I can think of before we leave. I think we talked a little bit about intimacy. Is there anything you want to add around intimacy? Because I think that can be something, again, that the secret witch struggles with as well. So I don't know if there's anything to add on that before we finish.
Well, just to say that intimacy starts with intimacy with yourself, right? Your inner landscape, what I call it. And that's your first intimacy, is you with you and you with your body. And when you have intimacy with yourself and your body, you are able to feel another human via the instrument of your body, right? Via the instrument of your perception. And when you're capable of feeling yourself and your body, and you can feel somebody else in their body, then you can connect with them, not based on your projection, but based on actual feeling. And then also that means you know how to touch them better, you know what's going on, all of that. So intimacy really starts with getting into the body and feeling. And that's really quite important.
Yeah, that was, I'm glad I asked that, because that feels like, it's like it starts with us. So thank you for that. I guess there's also, I know that you've been recently on the Netflix series Sex, Love and Goop, so that is something that is well worth people watching. Is there anything else that you're working on at the moment that you want to share just before we end, and where can people find you?
Yeah, well, there's one little fun trivia fact that's just pertaining to the Secret Witch. So my work's also featured in Will Smith's new memoir, which is called Will. And there's a whole chapter about us working together. It's chapter 20, I think, 19 or 20, called Surrender. But why I'm saying that is that in that chapter, he kind of narrates his internal self-talk. And in his internal self-talk, he thinks that I'm a witch. And so I was endlessly tickled by that. I was like, yes, I have fulfilled my career potential. That's just a little trivia. And it's also a very, very amazing book, because it's the book of a man who very unabashedly shares those struggles between having to be a certain way and being the person he wants to be. And it's really quite inspirational and amazing. And I think well worth checking out. Also, he reads it himself, obviously, and it's really hilarious. But it's also very funny. It's not only, there's some heavy stuff in there, but there's also some really fun stuff in there. As far as things I'm working on, one of the things that I started during the pandemic, also as a means of both providing people with some support that's that goes deeper than just support during the pandemic, but also because it's one of the things that I'm very passionate about, is I created this online series it's done live, but we'll record all the main aspects for later, and it's on a portal. So it's kind of a combo of things, but I do live events 12 times a year. It's called the 12 Facets of the Feminine. And it's a journey into 12 different archetypes. Ooh. Interestingly enough, the last one of this year is the Sorceress, coming up this Saturday. But that's, we're done with this year. But next year, we're also going very deep in all the different aspects of feminine archetypes as a means to feel ourselves within the context. And archetypes are an interesting and very important aspect in self-development, because essentially archetypes are the brought to life common experience that we can plug ourselves in, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and that's something I've been very passionate about. And each of those sessions, it's about 5 hours long. I do them in all time zones. So there's a UK Europe time zone, and then there's a US, Australia, Asia time zone. So I teach it twice within a day so that everyone can participate live. And so that's something that I've just posted yesterday on the website, and that I'm really passionate about for the year to come. I picked 12 more because we're still not anywhere where I can travel freely like we used to.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Yeah. And where can people find that?
On my website, and of course my website is michaelaboehm.com, and I'm assuming you'll post my name somewhere in the show notes. So.
Yeah, I'll pop that in the show notes as well. Yeah, I always do that. So that's wonderful. Yeah. That sounds like an amazing resource for people. And just to speak actually to archetypes, because that's such an important point, is like the archetypes are really the powerful stories that we use as a mirror in order to embody who we long to be. So that feels very juicy.
Yes.
Sure people will love that. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Glorious. Well, thank you so much. I think that's all I've got to ask. And it's been a real delight to talk about all of that. It's it's going to be a really powerful episode for our listeners. So thank you.
Thank you.
That was a juicy episode. My takeaways are: the wild woman archetype is a hugely important aspect of the witch, centered around the deep connection we have to nature and our bodies, and the rhythms and cycles in both. In the past, our intuition was valued as a survival tool. It's a natural genius of our body felt through our sensual perception. Sensual perception is not a requirement in today's society, but it is crucial that we choose it if we want to create pleasurable, juicy, alive feeling and magical lives. Pleasure is our birthright, but we do have to choose it and be devoted to it, bringing our 5 senses alive through practices of awareness, firstly cultivating background pleasure and then being able to receive external pleasure. There may be trauma hidden in our bodies that needs cleansing, and we can trust our wisdom to know how to release this. Non-linear movement is the best route to cleansing and reconnecting to our bodies. And this is a movement that is unorganised, for example, free-form dancing. Pleasure is different and unique for everyone, and Michaela's book offers some excellent hacks for how we can integrate pleasure into our lives in simple, easy ways. Polarity is important in relationships to create deeper intimacy and pleasure, and this simply means that we need opposites, one person to go and one person to flow. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.